Seiji Mizushima is a great director. A lot of people already know that he directed the first FMA and Shaman King, and those are probably the only shows my audience cares about. So welcome to a series where I look at some of his lesser known works and see what they have to offer, and today I'll be looking at Concrete Revolutio. The first thing you'll probably notice is look at this show. My god, everything looks incredible. The animation is amazing, character designs, art direction, imagery, everything on the visual side of things is impeccable. Every episode is jam-packed with information and dialogue given to the audience at a lightning-quick pace, accompanied by an interesting framing device that jumps between two different periods of time. I also love how, even without paying attention to the dates, there's a very clear visual indicator to tell you whether you're watching from the present or the past. This framing device was the best part of Concrete storytelling and set up intrigue well, showing the differences in atmosphere and the deterioration of certain relationships. This is where we get into the actual story of Concrete Revolutio. See, this takes place in a world where superhumans exist and fight for the safety of ordinary people. At least most of them do. The show tries to fit in as many ideas as possible with this premise. Witches, ghosts, monsters, aliens, time travelers, robots, so many fucking robots. It's almost like a kid coming home from school and pulling out his toy box, and without worrying about any sense of cohesion or rules, he just mashes them all against each other thinking about explosions and stuff, and it's great. Anyways, these superhumans also need protection, whether it's from the media trying to paint them in a bad light or from simple things like trying not to be a hobo. So our protagonist, Jiro, provides support for these amazing people as part of the Superhuman Bureau. At least this is what he used to do. In the present, he's now being hunted down by the bureau he used to work for and the superhumans he used to protect. On the surface, this seems like a pretty simple plot, but if you've never seen the show, you might find it strange that the few people who have call it confusing and fucking weird. And watching the first 3 episodes, I didn't understand why it was labeled this way either. But then you get to episode 4 and... what the fuck? So, I want to say now that even with all of these ideas and the fact that sometimes the writers struggle with restraint, most of the time this show feels very comprehensible. The characters, what they go through, and the connections built throughout the episodes are all easily understandable. The cast is endearing, and their dynamics between each other are incredibly entertaining. And even at the show's worst, there's so much charm in the level of insanity put into each episode that it's hard to hate or even dislike it. And the highs of this show are so unbelievably high that some of the more messy and sloppily handled elements seem more like minor problems that actually kind of benefit the feeling of what this show is trying to say. And if nothing else, again, look at this show. It's just inherently interesting to look at. So if you'd like to watch this show, please do it now. It was truly a great experience, and I wouldn't trade anything for it. Spoilers from here on out. It's hard to know where to even begin with this show. Okay, so in Concrete Revolutio, most of the time, things happen quickly, but they're never difficult to understand. There was this natural cause and effect order in each episode that made sense. Okay, so this character wants this, so he wants help from this character, but then a superhuman appears in the middle of the mission, so we have to change gears and do this now. Now jump to present, where the main character is being chased by that girl he wanted help from. There was a lot going on, but it was still easy to track what was happening, how characters related to one another, and what each character wanted out of the situation in each episode. At least if you were paying attention, it was relatively easy to track the path of the story. And there were very strong episodic stories and characters that sprouted from the creative team's brains. A ghost who never ages, desperately wanting to change. Androids trying to find a purpose in life outside of their programmed function. A narrow-minded robot who can't understand why humans are so flawed. A family of immortals who just want to live a normal life but can't due to the fact that they're being hunted by the government. This show is largely successful with exploring these concepts, but even when it fails, the sheer creativity and inherent allure of these scenarios is enough to get me invested. But as I mentioned before, there are some sloppily handled moments in the show. At times, certain developments feel like they come out of nowhere, characters go through revelations very quickly, and there are just some really jarring frames that force you to do a double take whenever you see them. Some characters will be talking, and then all of a sudden, another character just walks off and fuses with a tree. There's this weird thing that keeps happening where people just walk out from behind some sort of object, and it looks pretty funny, and yeah, I'd say that a lot of episodes fall into this limbo where 90% of it is good, but there's that 10% that still needs some work. While watching this show for the first time, it may feel like the people behind it feel aimless, like they didn't know what kind of story they wanted to tell. At its heart, this show is about this one guy forging a wide variety of relationships with different superhumans, and those relationships becoming more muddled over time. And when they stuck with this concept and used their framing device effectively, that was when this show was at its best. Its strengths lay in setting up these dynamics between characters characters and making me sad by telling me it wouldn't last. And there's some really effective drama that comes out of this premise. For some episodes though, it feels like the show abandons this premise entirely, opting instead to focus on abstract concepts like justice, freedom, and something about how there's a beast in all of us. But that cramming of ideas results in this explosion of creativity which, while very messy, feels alive in a way that's really fitting for how the show ends and the deeper implications of what it's trying to say. What it says about dreams and reality, what's mature and not, in many ways feels like a spiritual progression of the original FMA. I mean, come on, there's even an alternate reality plot twist. And while we're on the subject of that, I do like that twist from 03, but it does feel out of place in the kind of atmosphere that the show had set up prior to it. But here, in this crazy amalgamation of unique and out-of-this-world concepts, it feels right at home. The best way I can put it is that this kind of plot twist was made for this show and the wacky, wild world this story takes place in, and I love the direction this twist heads in. The theme of maturity, what's childish and what's grown up, was not only loosely explored in specific episodes, but it was also a personality trait that was subtly woven into the main character through his fascination with the superhuman known as the Rainbow Knight. Likewise, the framing device, the jumps in time, show how these characters are maturing, and the show specifically focuses on younger characters like Kiko and Daitetsu in the second half. When I look at the final arc and what happens in it, the chaotic and messy aura that the show has just feels right. It contributes to this notion of a kid playing pretend and coming up with all of these wondrous scenarios. After a certain point, they start writing the word justice into every line, and it actually does something. The way the characters speak about the concept of justice comes off as endearingly simple-minded. Now, was that necessarily intentional? I don't fucking know. But it adds something to the story, and I don't think it's fair to just wave it away as completely irrelevant. It all plays into this final scene of superhumans moving on from a world that doesn't need them anymore, and I like how the show used its premise to say something more meaningful. Maybe superhumans are nothing but children's imagination. One day, superhumans will vanish from this world. It's when a child somewhere wakes up from a dream. That's a line from the show, and I like it. The state this world is left in feels somber, seeing everybody just going on with life, kids reading comics about what happens at the end of the show, Furota and Kiko being the only ones left with any strong recollection of the events that transpired. It all contributes to this dreamlike feeling of a distant memory. This ending wraps up everything and ties all of the different concepts together perfectly. It was incredibly rewarding going back and rewatching from the very first episode of the first season, seeing how the themes of the show were subtly being woven into the background, how I kept finding new things that interested me about it, and how great of a show it was even before it gets to the best part. Starting from episode 7 of season 2, Mizushima and his team starts bringing their A game. Before, the show was still competently directed and there were some standout moments, but every single second of that stretch of the show is freaking amazing. It's intense, it's energetic, and it's genuinely a moving farewell to this very colorful and vibrant collection of characters. The stakes are established well, and Jiro is at war with all superhumans, and it's just an awesome climax to the show. What Jiro does at the end is some big brain Code Geass shit that's so freaking cool, and it's revealed in the best way ever, and I love him, and just However, while I did find that the sloppiness was charming and surprisingly added a lot to the emotions I felt from the ending, I do feel like the show could have struck a better balance between that solid character writing and the crazy, wacky feel of it. I love the cast of this show, but the writers were a bit too wishy-washy when it came to making tension between Jiro and the superhumans he got to know. Upon my rewatch, I was much more lenient about this because I felt there was enough genuine conflict to feel satisfying, and even in episodes where the two parties are more friendly towards each other, the interactions between them were really fun. But that doesn't mean I forgot everything I had a problem with. With all of these flashes to present time showing how Jiro is now at war with the people he used to call friends, you'd expect the reason this happened to be serious, and preferably it would be the result of some ideological disagreement that the two parties had with one another. But no, the real reason why he left is because his cat girlfriend didn't want him to see this other girl anymore because she was jealous, so he left the bureau because of that. Okay, not the reason I was expecting, though Jiro has shown that he has a particular disdain for some of the shady decisions made by the bureau, but it never seems to matter that much to him since he works with them so often after he leaves. I feel like a better way to handle the ending of the first season would be to make Jiro an enemy of the public by having him rampage and causing a lot of damage, which would result in more interesting clashes and turmoil. Relying only on a love triangle to be the rift between Jiro and his friends is, how should I put it, that spark for interesting conflict, it just isn't there. That's why most of the interesting drama in the second season doesn't tend to involve the Superhuman Bureau members, barring episodes 7 and onwards. Some of the episodes of the second season follow an incredibly predictable formula. This issue is brought up, the Superhuman Bureau is shown to have a different solution to the problem that conflicts with Jiro's interests. Jiro and someone argue for a bit, and then they decide to team up and save the day together. Welcome to my analysis of Concrete Revolutio 2nd ED. This frame right here symbolizes the fact that whatever Jiro does, the Bureau literally does not give a fuck and will let him get away with anything. And it's not like I want them to fight all the time. One of the themes the show most focuses on is the fact that not everything is black and white, that it's not easy to clearly define good and evil. So highlighting the similarities between the two parties is a necessary thing to do in this kind of story, but highlighting the differences is just as important. For example, the first episode is pretty good. The Bureau strikes a good balance between being sympathetic and hostile towards their former ally, and I think that bit of sympathy, that hesitation to fight Jiro, is a good thing in this episode because it's only the start of their feud. Of course they're gonna have mixed feelings about attacking a person they have a strong connection with. There are also good reasons for Jiro and the Superhuman Bureau to team up in later episodes, but when combined with every other episode where all they do is work together, this potentially interesting moment where the characters put their differences aside to help each other gets ruined by the redundancy of the situation. Anyways, episode 1 also does a good job of showing the differences in methods between both parties when dealing with superhumans. At this point in the story, superhumans are hated for certain events that have transpired during the finale of season 1, so the Bureau is now tasked with restraining all superhumans, even ones who haven't necessarily done anything wrong. That, contrasted with Jiro's desire to protect all superhumans, is an interesting moral disagreement that they have with one another. Also, as a side note, I really like Raito, he's a good character, and I'm sad about what happened to him at the end. Episodes 2 through 6 don't explore the ideological disagreements the two parties have enough, although I do think that those episodes are great, just in a different way. Now, I want to say right now that despite my criticism of that specific part of the story, generally speaking, I still found it to be effective. That simple story of these relationships being torn apart is brought to a bittersweet end. Jiro ends up in a state where he can never be with his friends again, and the show does a good job of following through on that very human and relatable conflict that it set up. And it's honestly pretty satisfying to see everybody team up for one last time, only for it to end tragically. Despite the fact that I was slightly disappointed with season 2 for not focusing too much on that element of the story, this was done well. All the way through, this is an engaging watch, and if nothing else, it's pure fun that's animated beautifully and directed and edited effectively. The characters are all likable, the interactions that they have with each other are endearing, and the concepts being explored with its premise are ambitious and varied. I think of Concrete Revolutio as a great show that has a lot of tiny flaws which will make it very hit or miss for some people. If you didn't heed my spoiler warning from before, I still recommend that you watch this show. It's something different and truly a great experience. You should watch it. I'll be going now.